Hello, everyone. Good day. Welcome to Remedial Instruction in English. Today, we are going to discuss remedial instruction in listening. Here are our learning outcomes. First, define listening and listening comprehension. Determine the factors affecting students' listening comprehension. Explain the process of listening comprehension, and discuss some strategies of listening comprehension. All right, let us start. Listening plays an important role in communication, as it is said that of the total time spent on communicating, listening takes up 40 to 50%, while speaking 25 to 30%, reading 11 to 16%, and writing about 9%. That's according to Mendelssohn in 1994. Although the teaching of listening comprehension has long been somewhat neglected and poorly taught aspect of English in many ESL and EFL uh, classrooms, listening is now more than ever regarded as much more important in both English as a foreign language classrooms or English as a second language classrooms and in second language acquisition researches. Listening involves an active process of deciphering and constructing meaning from both verbal and nonverbal messages. Thus, the label of passive skill applied to listening is a misnomer. This misunderstanding may stem from the fact that superficially learners seem to only sit in a language lab quietly, listen to pre recorded dialogues, and write the answers to some questions related to the oral stimulus, usually dictations. It is evident then that listening is not a passive skill as it has been claimed to be, as it demands a number of complicated processes. Later on, you'll get to know that. There are two subsuming processes, actually three, with a combination of the two. And these are bottom up processing and the top down processing. But as to the as to these types, we'll have those in details later on in the next few slides. But for now, let us take a look at on the various definitions of listening. Okay, according to Anderson and Lynch in 1988, arguing what is successful listening is that it entails understanding something that happens because of what a speaker says. The listener has a crucial part to play in the process by activating various types of knowledge and by applying what he or she knows to what he or she hears, and that he or she tries to understand what the speaker means. Another one is Underwood in 1989, which uh, gives a simplified definition of listening as the activity of paying attention to and trying to get meaning from something we hear. Another one is from Mendelssohn in 1994, which he defines listening comprehension as the ability to understand the spoken language of native speakers. O'Malley, Chamote, and Cooper in 1989 also offer a useful and more extensive definition that is listening comprehension is an active and conscious process in which the listener constructs meaning from by using cues from contextual information and from existing knowledge while relying upon and multiple strategic resources to fulfill the task requirement. Yeah, Mendelssohn points out that in listening to spoken language, the ability to decipher the speaker's intention is required of a competent listener, in addition to other abilities such as processing the linguistic forms like speech, speed, and fillers, coping with listening in an interaction, understanding the whole message contained in the discourse, comprehending the message without understanding every word, rather, and recognizing different genres. So listeners must also know how to process and how to judge what the elocutionary force of an utterance is. That is, what this string of sounds is intended to mean in a particular setting under a particular set of circumstances. This is like an effect of real communication, as explained by Mendelssohn in 1994. Another definition is from Roast in 2002, where he defined listening as a process of receiving what the speaker actually says, constructing and representing meaning, negotiating meaning with the speaker and responding, and creating meaning through involvement, imagination, and empathy. To listen well, listeners must have the ability to decode the message, the ability to apply a variety of strategies and interactive processes to make meaning, making sense of the sounds that the listener hears, and also the ability to respond to what is said in a variety of ways, depending on the purpose of the communication. Listening as well involves listening for thoughts, feelings, and even intentions. Doing so requires an active involvement, effort, and practice. So, to sum it up, it is widely admitted that listening comprehension is not merely the process of a unidirectional receiving of audible symbols, but it is an interactive process. Okay, that's as what Brown pointed out in 2001. Additionally, Clark and Brown added that the hearer, after receiving the information, assigns a literal meaning to the utterance first, and then later on assigns an intended meaning to the utterance. A key to human communication is our ability, guys, to match perceived meaning with intended meaning. Now, there are various factors affecting students' listening comprehension. To name a few, we have categorized them as internal and external factors. For internal factors, refer these refer to the learner's characteristics, something that is innate, something that is intrinsic to the learner. Language such as language proficiency, memory, age, gender, background knowledge, as well as aptitude, motivation, and psychological and physiological factors. So apparently, these are these are the things that are intrinsic to the learners. Okay, conversely, external factors are mainly related to the type of language input and task and the context in which listening occurs. So, other external factors include speed of delivery and different accents of the speakers. Sometimes um, we, we, we may have difficulty understanding or comprehending the utterance because of the speed of delivery and even the accent of the speakers. Another one is the content and task of listening materials. And the third is context. So for context, this refers to the spatial temporal location of the utterance, that is in a particular time and particular place at which the speaker makes an utterance, and the particular time and place at which the listener hears or reads the utterine. So basically, this is the um, the setting, the environment, no, the situation that surrounds the message, in which of course it largely affect no the receiving and the of the message. Not only the receiving, but of course the responding as well of the message. And then we also have context. So this is another major factor influencing the interpretation of meaning. This refers to the linguistic context or the textual environment provided by the discourse or text in which a particular utterance occurs. Context constrains the way in which we interpret the response. In here, we can infer that the person is not going to a picnic by judging from the context. Say, for example, this um, conversation of speaker A and B. Okay, for example, speaker A asked a question. Are you coming going to Baguio with us? And then the speaker B responded, I have a paper to finish by Monday. So we can infer from speaker B's response that he or she isn't interested in coming along with speaker A going to Baguio. Although speaker B does not explicitly refuse no respond to speaker's A's question, but it can be inferred that it is a form of refusal. So that's how context works, no, in the interpretation of meaning, no, and that significantly affects the listening comprehension. And with this as well, you might um, relate it to the different maxims. If you're familiar with Paul Grice's conversational maxim, the maxim of quantity, maxim of quality, manner, and relevance. So, and then the prosodic elements may also come into play with this external factor, which is context. All right, so let's go to the significance of listening. Why is there a need to teach listening, to emphasize listening? Okay, so listening is the most frequently used language skill. Okay, um, it is the primary means by which incoming ideas and information are taken in, and that's according to Define 1982. Okay, another one is from Wolvin and Coakley in 1988, in which they concluded that both in and out of the classroom, listening consumes more of daily communication time than other forms of verbal communication. So it is central to the lives of students, not only students but all of us for that matter, and that for students it really is part of how they are able to learn in the entire educational develop in their entire educational development. Listening as well is the most frequently used language skill in the classroom. Both instructors and students acknowledge the importance of listening comprehension for success in academic setting. We get to listen often in classroom discussions, right? It is important that we have to listen. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to learn from our instructor during discussion or lecture, right? So, numerous studies indicated that efficient listening skills are more important than reading skills as a factor contributing to academic success. But I think there are other evidences as well, or studies who which might tell otherwise, but on the studies of Coakley and Wolven, even Truesdale in 1980, they indicated that efficient listening skills are were more important than reading skills. Okay, so now, yeah, nevertheless, it is evident that listening plays a significant role in the lives of people. Listening is even more important for the lives of students since listening is used as a primary medium of learning at all stages of education. Okay, now let's go through the process of listening comprehension. I know that you guys are familiar with these, but it is important that you have to refresh your knowledge on the process of listening, because we, as teachers, remedial teachers, it is really of great importance that we thoroughly understand how it works, how listening comprehension works, so we may be able to, teach our learners how to carefully listen, how to effectively listen, and how to become efficient listeners so that they may be able to learn. Okay, so listening comprehension, guys, is recorded theoretically as an active process in which individuals concentrate on selected aspects of oral input, form meaning from passages, and associate what they hear with existing knowledge. Cognitive psychology defines comprehension as information processing. Okay, and then another term is schemata. So, schemata are the guiding structures in the comprehension process. The schema is described by Rummer Hart, as a data structure for representing the generic concepts stored in memory. It can be used to represent our knowledge about all the concepts, those underlying objects, situations, events, sequences of events, actions, and sequences of actions. According to the cognitive comprehension theory, schema means an abstract textual structure that the listener uses to make sense of the given text. So, often, most of the time, we really use our schema to make sense of what we are reading, and that when a schema has been evoked, it will become a guiding structure in communication, in communicate I mean in comprehension. If the incoming information is matched with the schema, then the listeners have succeeded in comprehending the text. If they are not compatible, either the information or the schema will be discarded or modified. And that the principle of schema leads us to these two fundamental modes of information processing, which in turn, these two modes of information processing create a new process, and that is the third one, which is interactive processing. Okay, so let's discuss these three models of listening processes. The first one mm, is the bottom up. Okay, bottom up processing. Okay, so bottom up processing is activated by the new incoming data. The feature of the data pass into the system through the best fitting bottom level schemata. So schemata are hierar- hierarchically formed from the most specific at the bottom to the most general at the top. It also acknowledges that listening is a process of decoding the sounds from the smallest meaningful units, and that is and those are phonemes to complete text. So basically, when we listen, now we are trying to decode first. No, we are trying to decode the sounds. No, and then we get to process that after into our brain, and thus phonemic units are decoded and connected together to construct words. Words are connected together to construct phrases, and then phrases are connected together to construct utterances. Okay, and the utterances are connected together to construct complete, meaningful text. And that is to say, guys, that meaning is arrived at the last step in the process. So that is when we talk about bottom up processing. Okay, a chain of incoming sounds triggers schemata hierarchically organized in a listener's mind. And then the phonological knowledge works on the morphological knowledge work on the lexical and tactical knowledge works on, and that thus, the listener make use of his knowledge of words, syntax, and grammar to work on form and the bottom-up processing. So this process is closely associated with the listener's linguistic knowledge. However, bottom-up processing has its weak points. Now, every if all of these models has its fair share of weak points. So understanding a text is an interactive processes between the listener's previous knowledge and text. Efficient comprehension that associates the textual material with listener's brain doesn't only depend on one's linguistic knowledge. So the processing really is not dependent on the linguistic knowledge alone. So we make use of our prior knowledge. We make use of schemata to make sense of the material. The next one is top-down processing. This is the second type. Top-down processing is explained as employing background knowledge and comprehending the meaning of a message. Carroll and Esther Holt in 1983 pointed out that in top-down processing, the system makes general predictions based on a higher level, general schemata, and then searches the input for information to fit into these practically satisfied higher order schemata. So, in terms of listening, guys, the listener actively constructs or possibly reconstructs the original meaning of the speaker, employing new input as clues. So, in this reconstruction process, the listener employs prior knowledge of the context and situation within which the listener occurs to understand what he or she hears, right? Context and situation involve such things as knowledge of the topic at hand, the speaker or speakers and their correlation with the situation, as well as with each other and previous events. So, we must realize if the incoming information the listener hears is unfamiliar to him or her, it can't evoke his or her schemata, and he or she can only depend heavily on his linguistic knowledge. And that is pretty much bottom up, right? Besides, although the listener can trigger a schema, he might not have the suitable schema expected by the speaker. Thus, only relying on top-down processing may result in the failure of comprehension. Okay, so again, that's one of the weak points of top down. Just as there are also some weak points of the bottom up processing. Okay, let's go to the third type. So the third type is what we call interactive processing. So this overcomes the disadvantages of both bottom up and the top down processing to augment the comprehension. So this is now where um, murag nag-leverage siya no, sa bottom up and sa top down. So in the early 1980s, it was the tendency that only top-down processing was acknowledged to improve second language listening comprehension. However, it is now more generally accepted that both top-down and bottom-up listening processing should be combined now to enhance um, listening comprehension. So this is where the third model is born. Complex and simultaneous processing of background knowledge information, contextual information, and linguistic information make comprehension and interpretation become easy. When the content of the material is familiar to the listener, he or she will employ his or her background knowledge at the same time to make predictions which will be proved by the new input. Okay? So, combined siya. Alright? Okay. Now, in this section, we will discuss some strategies of listening comprehension. Okay, so one of the methods learners can become actively involved in controlling their own learning or managing their own learning is by using strategies. We know that Van der Grift in 1999 showed or explain that strategy development is important for listening training because strategies are conscious means by which listeners can guide and evaluate their own comprehension and responses. Okay, so there are among all the strategies for listening, O'Malley and Chamot 1990 claim three main types of listening strategies. Okay, you have metacognitive, cognitive, and social strategies. Okay, let's have the first one, metacognitive strategy. The metacognitive strategy was like a kind of self-regulated learning. It included the attempt to plan, check, monitor, select, revise, and evaluate. Okay. For example, for metacognitive planning strategies, learner would clarify the objectives of an anticipated listening task and attend to specific aspects of language input or situational details that assisted in understanding the task. Okay, so generally, it can be discussed through pre-listening planning strategies, no, while listening monitoring strategies and post-listening evaluation strategies. Okay, di ba? Metacognition, thinking about thinking. Okay, so there is self-monitoring here. Okay, you the listener the listener plans, checks, monitors, selects, revise, and evaluate. So the listeners in this case would clarify the objectives, of what is going to be the task. So they could prepare, or they could find ways on which aspects of the language are needed in the task. Okay, next one is cognitive strategies. So these are related to comprehending and storing input in working memory or long-term memory for later retrieval. They are investigated from the aspects of bottom-up strategies and top-down strategies. Now, for bottom-up processing, guys, it refers to using the incoming input as the basis for understanding the message, coming from the smaller units of the language, right? On the text, per se. Comprehension begins with the received data that is analyzed as successive levels of organization, and those include sounds, words, as process of decoding. For bottom-up strategies, Henner Tan Kina in 1987 engaged a similar study and pointed out that effective listeners were good at using their previous knowledge and experience to raise hypotheses or assumptions about the text, integrating new information into their ongoing interpretations, making influences to bridge gaps, assessing their interpretations, and modifying their hypotheses if necessary. On the other hand, top-down processing went from meaning to language. So listeners can try to predict what will utter by the signal. However, okay, it is important to note no, that listening comprehension was neither only top-down nor bottom-up processing. Okay. Next one is social or affective strategies. Okay, Vandergrift 2000 in 2003 defined the strategies as the techniques where listeners use to collaborate with others to verify understanding or to lower anxiety. Okay, another point was stated by Haptikapper, okay, stating that stated that socio-affective strategies were those which were non-academic in nature and involved stimulating learning through establishing a level of empathy between the instructor and student. This is something like uh, the, the, the rapport that the instructor or the teacher and students are established when when both parties are in good terms, no, or have this have established a good rapport, then it is more likely that they would have that they would have um that would have a good listening or exchanging of communication, right? So it is um it is essential for listeners to know how to reduce the anxiety, feel confident in doing listening tasks, and promote personal motivation in improving listening competence. So bit more on the behavioral aspect. According to O'Malley and Chapman in 2001, among the four strategies of management strategies, social strategies, cognitive strategies, affective strategies in listening comprehension, both social and affective strategies influence the learning situation immediately because this has something to do with the setup, right? So, a great deal has been written about language strategies. These strategies have been categorized as learning strategies and communication strategies. Okay, so um, strategies that strategy use varies with proficiency and so the relationship between strategy use and proficiency level is an important one, and that while we are considering using listening strategies, it is in to to teach learners, we must for once as remedial teachers develop our own listening comprehension, our increase our level of proficiency when it comes to listening. As cliche may it sound, that you cannot teach, you cannot give what you do not have, and the very key of teaching listening to kids, to our learners, is for us instructors, teachers, to listen first. We must know how to listen first before we can actually teach listening. No, listening really. is never easy. In fact, if I were to say, it is one of the most difficult skill to teach, because it is something other than it is something that is not visible, something that is something that we cannot see. You know, um, it's difficult to measure as well. Okay, it requires skills and proficiency. So again, for one, to be able to teach listening, particularly in a remedial classroom, it is important, guys, to note that to be able to teach listening, we have to know how to listen first to our learners. No, listen and establish rapport, because it is only then that we are able to really identify, what it is, then that we are able to identify what are the things that um, that we need to work on for them. Okay, so listening is the key. All right, it's listening is, yeah, the root of all communication. That for us to become good listeners, we shouldn't only be preoccupied of you know of ourselves. No, we must know how to listen. Okay, a good listener isn't preoccupied of himself or herself, but one that knows how to listen. Now, how a good communicator, I mean, is isn't only preoccupied of speaking about herself or himself, but the one who knows how to listen first. And that goes to remedial teachers as well. Okay? Again, listening is the key. Right? Thank you everyone for listening. I hope that you are learning from this lesson. And I hope you guys in good health, stay safe and healthy, everybody. Thank you. Have a good day.